This is Gemara, Metziah, Daf Samach Hey, and we're holding in the bottom of Samach Dalid Amid Beis, in middle of discussing some of the unique, almost kulais, times in which there is something that the lender, the malveh, benefits, and usually any form of benefit by the malveh automatically constitutes a form of ribis. But we've been seeing that there are, whether it's the pshiti, the small coins, there are times in which the malveh could get a small benefit, and it is allowed. So says the Gemara of Yosef Bar Chama, 10 lines from the bottom of Samach Dalid, Amid Beis, Rav Yosef Bar Chama, Takif Avdi the Inshi. Yosef Bar Chama would grab hold of the avadim of people, Demaski Behu Zuzi, in which they owed him money. Someone owed Rav Yosef Bar Chama money, for example. He lent someone else money. That guy owes him money. So if that person owes him money, he would grab that person's avadim, va'avid behu avidita, and work with the Eved, and the Eved would work for him in the interim. Amle Rava Brei, he said, Rava, his son, my time, Rav and Marachi, why are you doing this? Amar Le, so responded Rav Yosef Bar Chama, Anokir Rav Nachman Svirali. I only Rav Nachman. What's Rav Nachman? That was yesterday's discussion. No, excuse me. Damar different Rav Nachman. Damar Rav Nachman. Avda nehom krise lo yishave. An Eved is not worth the value of that which it eats. Therefore, in a scenario in which an Eved, the feed him is more than the work that he does, and therefore, says Rav Yosef Bar Chama, because I'm feeding the Eved, I'm in essence making him benefit. I, the lender, am not gaining. The borrower is gaining. True, I'm working with his Eved, but I'm feeding him. So he, at the end of the day, is considered to be gaining. Amar Le, so Rava, again, this is Rava Brei, Rava, the son of Yosef Bar Chama. So Yosef Bar Chama answered, so Amar Le, Rava responds, Rav Nachman, when did Rav Nachman say this? Din, Kigoyin, for example, Ta'ari Avde, de Market Beikuvi. He's only talking about a case of like a Dari, the Eved. Dari, Rav Nachman's own Eved, de Merkavi Beikuvi, who would do nothing. He would dance in the bars, and therefore that which he produced was worth that much less than that which you paid him. But Avdi Achrina Miyamar, says Rava back, I don't understand. Other Avadim have very high value, and they're worth more than the food that you give them. So Amar Le, so Rachama responds again, 3 lines from the bottom. Anoki Odrav Daniel Barav Ketina, Amar Rav. That's why I hold like Sfira Li that what? The Amar. Ha-toikev avdu shel chaveroi v'asa by melacha potter. I hold like such an opinion, Rav Daniel bar Rav Ketina, who says that if you grab hold of your friend's Evan and you work with him, then the halacha is you do not have to pay him for using his Evet. You do not have to pay the master. As we turn over to Samachei Amud Aleph, explains the Gemara why. Why do you not have to pay the master? It's his Eved. And you grab hold and you worked with the master's Eved. Why do you not have to pay him? Says the Gemara, you know why in the top line of Samachei Amud Aleph? Tenicha leid lo nistere avde. The reason you don't have to pay the owner is because the owner is happy. The owner is happy that the Eved has work to do, that he doesn't get into the habit of being lazy, as the Tab Rashi points out, the line that we have to remind ourselves always. We should never accustom ourselves to being batal. And therefore, while the Eved is now being worked, if you grab such an Eved and you work with him, at some level, you're doing a benefit to the Eved's owner. Amar Lei. So Rava doesn't give up. Rava responds, Honey Mili, when is this? Says Rava, you're right. But that's only Delay Maski Bezuzi. That's only in a scenario in which you don't have a claim that that person doesn't owe you money. Bamar. But you, Rav Yosef Bar Chama, you lent him money. So what's the problem? And now you're getting what is perceived as a benefit. Maybe you're right that it's not a real hatava, but it looks that way, and therefore, it looks like ribis. The Amar Rav Yosef. Even though they said a perfectly comparable case, you live in someone else's courtyard without his das. You don't have to pay him. A scenario, of course, that you're gaining, he's not losing. However, Sochar, Helveu, excuse me, Elo, Sar Laus Helveu Bedar Bechatziroi, then yes, Sar Laus Schar. But if you lent him money, then you lived in his house and you have to pay him. Why? Because if you don't pay him, it looks like you're getting an extra benefit. Looks like the malva is getting back. Not only am I going to get back the $100 I lent you, I'm also getting the extra benefit that I lived in your house. So therefore, you have to pay him for that. And so too, in our case, in Amar Lei, so it says if Yisrael Chama to Rava, his son, you are correct. Hadri B, I have a chayzer that which I said. Says the Gemara, Amar Abaye. Comes along Abaye, 10 lines down. The first word of line is Abaye. And he teaches us the following. Haiman demaski zuzi derabita bechavre. Someone who had a claim, his friend owed him ribis. They had a halva, there was a loan in which they stipulated ribis, and so one has to pay back the other. But instead of paying back cash, you wanted to pay back with something else. Chita, wheat is worth 4 measures per zuz, b'shaka. So you wanted to give him 5 for each zuz that he owed him. He owed him $100, so instead of giving him 400, chit, 4 per zuz, he gave him 500. Ki mafkina minei. Salacha is we make him pay back the ribis. Arba mafkina minei idach azulehu t'kamayzel gabe. What do you have to pay back? You have to pay back the original amount, but the extra is considered a discount. It's considered I sold you the wheat at a lower price. That's the din of Abaye. That in such a scenario you would be allowed to keep the extra wheat. Extra chitin. Rava Amar says, Rava, I disagree. Chamisha mafkina minei. No, he has to pay 5 per zuz. Why? To make kara b'teres rebisa sali adei. Because originally it kept his hand in the form of ribis, and therefore all of it has to be paid back. Not just the additional 1 measurement, but the entirety of it has to be back. So it's all paid in the guise of the loan as a form of ribis. Therefore, it all has to be returned. So machlokes is Abaye and Rava, whether it's all going to be returned or just the portion of ribis. Va'amar Abaye, 50 lines down. The first 4 lines of Va'amar Abaye continues. Abaye, Haiman de Masik Zuzi. The Masik Arba Zuzi de Rabisa. V'chavre, someone had a claim of 4 zuz of ribis from his friend. V'yavle glima v'gavayu. And instead of paying him, he gave him his shirt. Ki mafkina minei. When we are taking it from the malveh, arba mafkina minei, glima loy mafkina minei. We make it pay back 4, but we do not take back the item itself. Again, Abaye. Rava again disagrees and says, Rava, kalima mafkina minei. Says Rava, no, we indeed do make him pay back the shirt itself. Why? My taima ki hechid. We don't want people to say, what does it look like? Kalima demaxi v'koi. What does it look like? It looks like Glima de Marsi V'Koi, the shirt that he wears, Glima de Rabita Ho. We don't want people talking that he's wearing ribis, and that's the reason why we would require it to be given back. Amar Rava, says Rava, one last din of a forbidden ribis loan and how we deal with it in the aftermath. Haiman demasik tracer zuzi derabita bechavre. Someone had a claim of 12 zuz of ribis, and va'ager lechotzer demitagra basara. Instead of paying it back, he gave him a chotzer that is worth 10. V'agritin alei tracer. Says, I'll give it to you for 12. Ki mafkina minei, tracer mafkina minei. So what happens is that when we take it from him, he takes from 12. Amrlei, Rav Achoi, Midifti l'Ravina, v'lei malei. Why didn't he say to him, ki lei malei ki agra, hachi davika mishtar shili? Why doesn't he say to him, when I rented it, I did so because I was gaining? Now that I'm not gaining, now that I'm not gaining, we go by the regular price, which is 5, which is 10 zuvim. Answers the Gemara, answers the Gemara, savris v'kavlis. You thought about it, you knew what was going on, you accepted it, so you can't back down afterwards. We continue with the Mishnah. About 20 lines from the white line. Says the Mishnah Marbin Alaschar that if someone rents out an area, we increase the rent if the guy doesn't pay back. He's supposed to pay in the first of the month, he doesn't. So for the delayed payment, we require him to pay more. However, Ve'in Marbin Alamecher, but not so for a sale. The sale was made, even if he doesn't pay for it, we don't increase the price. You rented your chatzer pay me now? But you don't pay me now, you pay me every month. Of course, it's 12 slav for the year. Motor, says the Mishnah. Machlos asada v'amrlai emi achshavat noisili ari shalcha belavzavim legurcha b'shana shtei maser mana. That case is going to be aser. So of course, getting more involved in the fine nuances over here, when it's going to be motor and when do the isurim apply. Asks the Gemara, the obvious kasha, Maishna Reisha, Maishna Seifa. What's the chilek? Explains the Gemara, Rabbi Rav Yosef Damri Tarmayu, Schiros ein mishtalemes, elo livsoif. A famous machlekes, when do you owe your worker money? Do you owe it only when he concludes the job, or you owe it only, the whole time? So says Rav Yosef, you only pay it at the end, and therefore there's halachic implications. Vaykivan flamat zmane lemigvei, since the time of collection has not come, that's why lavagar not le mishavehu. It's not considered paying to wait. Because that's the normal amount of time. But if someone says it may then it's different. Why? Because he's making it cheaper from the fact that they agreed at an earlier date. Whereas Seifa, Kim Disvinani Alei, it's a sale, Ubay Lemishkal, Dami, Me'ashav, Hilkach, Agar therefore will be Aser, Huve Aser, Amar Ravdika Rabbah, Rabbanan Ba Milsa, Vakmua Kra. Which pasuk was it? Asachir Shana Vishana Schir Shal Shana Zu, Eino Mishalemes Ella Limishana Zu. And you can't pay back anything at a later date. Why? Because when you're paying the hired workers, you pay when the job is done, but you can't delay it till time afterwards. Continues the Gemara, the first white line, Ve'im Ligayren Bishneim Asar Mana. Says the Gemara, but if he says, pay me during the Gairen, during the threshing season, then the price is going to be Shneim Asar Mana, the price is going to be 12 mana. So says the Gemara, what is the story for the surcharge, this paying extra, when one is paying at a later date, a delayed payment? Omar Rav Nachman, teaches Rav Nachman, Tarsha Shari, says Rav Nachman, Tarsha, which is a name for a transaction. We have to see what that means. But Tarsha, that is going to be mutter. when you're buying an item on credit, but at a higher price, that's allowed. Says the Gemara, and just to take a moment, I know we're running slow in time, but let's look at Rashi. Rashi says, Tarsha Shari. Rashi's a little higher up on the page. Limkar Schaira Behamtana. To pay for something Behamtana, that because you're waiting, Biyoiser Midamel. If you pay today, the price is X. You pay tomorrow, the fact that you got the extra day to pay, you're going to have to pay more. Ubelvad Shalo Yifarishloi. So adds on Rashi, how does this Tarsha work? There's a critical nikuda. A critical ingredient is that you cannot explicate. Shaloi yefarish loi. You cannot say if you pay now, or you look because it's cheaper. El yimkar stam bekach lekach liyoim ploini. Happens to be if you pay more tomorrow, it's more. And of course, one could start to understand that this is the beginning of early bird specials. This is the beginning of you get a discount if you pay earlier, etc. So says Rav Nachman, Tarsha is going to be mutter. Excuse me, you can't see the Gemara on the third white line. The Amrila, and some say Rav Bar Chamer Rav Nachman. Asur. The Mishnah seemed to imply that if you're paying at a latter date, it's Asur. What happened to Tarsha being Motor? Amarle Hasam Kitzle Acha Loi Kitzle. Over there, they quoted the price that it's cheaper if you pay now. Therefore, it's clear that if you're paying late, you're paying extra. That's the reason why it's Asur. Whereas in our case of Tarsha, it was not Katzle. Amar Rav Papa, says Rav Papa, a further detail within this world of Tarsha. Tarsha Didi Shari. Rav Papa says, my Tarsha is mutter, my time. Says Rav Papa, you know the reason and what's unique about my Tarsha? Shechrai loi pasid. My beer does not spoil, and therefore I could store it. Zuzi lo yisarich, I don't need the cash, and therefore what? I know the kavina milsa gabe loikeach, and therefore I'm doing him a favor by selling it to him on credit. So because I have no benefit, the seller, why should I lose out? That if I would have sold it at a later date in Nissan, I would have been able to charge a higher price. So I'm giving it to you now. I should lose because I'm giving you something extra? Says Rav Papa, therefore, my Tarsha is mutter. I'm there. Sheshis Breder Rav Idi Rav Papa, my Chazimar. Tekazla Basar Didach. Why do you, Rav Papa, go after Basar Didach? Go for the way that you're viewing it, that you personally could have waited. Zel Basar did too. Look through the eyes, look through the vantage point of the customer. If he would have had cash, he would have bought it today and he would have paid today's price. He's paying it a higher price in the future, and therefore it should be extra. Why? It should be agar noterle. That you're getting a reduced price you're paying today, a higher price you're paying later. So why should that be mutter? Amar Rav Chama. Continuing this discussion of Tarsha. Says Rav Chama, Tarsha di vadei shari. So we started, Rav Nachman started off with this din of Tarsha, this din of some level of an allowance to take a higher price at a later date. Rav Papa wanted to extend it to his Tarsha, which the Gemara called into question. Continues the Gemara, and the Gemara now what says Rav Chama, my Tarsha for sure is okay. My taimo, what's the reason? Nichaleho, on the last line of Samachayam and Aleph, says Rav Tarsha, Nichaleho deleiku pershusi, because they are happy that the item stays in my possession, and they are my shliach. Why? Because wherever they go, shav kilu mechsa, they give them an exemption. You're Rav Chama's purchaser. You do business with the Heiliger Rav Chama. They get a tax break. So says Rav Chama, this buyer himself is gaining from buying from me. V'nakalu shuka, and they hold up the market for him, and therefore says Rav Chama, I for sure am allowed to charge extra for paying at a later date. Tarsha Didi, says Rav Chama, is for sure mutter. We turn over to Samachayim Beis, weighs in the Gemara as the halacha. The Hilchasa, what's the halacha? Kirav Chama. The halacha is like Rav Chama, the Hilchasa Kirav Elazar, and the Hilchasa Kirav Yanai Damar. Mali Hein, Mali Demehem. Rashi fills in some of the blanks. Rav Elazar's Ribs Ksutzas Yetzev Dayanim. That's Hilchsa Rav Elazar. Hilchsa Rav Chama, that Rav Chama's Tarsha is mutter, and Hilchsa Rav Yanai that says Mali Hey Mali Demand, that goes back to Daf Samach Gimel, that we don't care whether you give the items, we give their value. We continue with the Mishnah Samachayim at base. Machar lo yesasade. If someone sells someone else a field, v'nasan lo mixas damim, and the buyer gives part of the price. I'm buying an item for $100, give you $50. V'amar loi, and the seller says, so whenever you want, have a mice. Whenever you want, bring the rest of the cash, and then the item retroactively will be yours, aser. That is a story that is forbidden. Rashi says, L'aslis kain, to make such an arrangement. And Rashi fills in, says Rashi, that detail that we spoke out, it's only if you tell him that when you pay the money, you're having a kinyan, retroactive to now. That's why lefikach. Therefore, Asher Lasses King. Why? Because if the seller goes and eats the fruit, these items that the buyer is in the middle of buying, so if he goes and eats the peiros now, who's ready is back at the time of the sale. And it comes out that the seller is gaining, that he was able to eat the peiros in the interim. So we see that for waiting to pay, the seller is gaining, therefore it is aser. Parpi of the Mishnah, if someone says, make a loan, as the field is a security, if you don't pay me within 3 years, then it's mine. It is that they were allowed him to keep it, because even though it's worth more than the original time, says the Gemara, that's going to be allowed. Now, just to parenthetically point out, okay, we don't really have time right now, but this story of Tarsha is very, on the previous Gemaras where Heter Iska comes in. Okay, let's begin. Of course, if the Gemara itself in Izah Neshech is not loaded enough, the depth of it and the psak of it is that much more loaded. Of course, I am to not be familiar, but there are tidbits we could glean. Says the Gemara, mi'ochel peiros. So, based for part of the fruit item, who should eat the peiros in the interim? Says the Gemara, we have a machlekes, Rav Huna and Rav Anan. Rav Huna amar moichel peiros, Rav Anan amar mishal shen is a peiros. We give the peiros to a third party. V'loi pligi, says the Gemara. Hadamar l'chimaisis. What is when he says when you bring it kani? Hadamar l'chimaisis kani meyachshav. What is the case of the Mishnah? That you said it's going to be kinyan meyachshav, and therefore the meicher cannot eat the peiros, because then it's a potential that he's gaining. One is what he said, you'll make a kinyan only when you bring the money. Then the meicher can, yes, eat the peiros. Tani Rav Safra. Taught Rav Safra's beribis devei Rav Chia, a brisa about ribis in the yeshiva of Rav Chia. Pamim, 4 different permutations teaches Rav Safra in the yeshiva of Rav Chia. Number 1, Pamim sheshneim mutar, Pamim sheshneim asurim, Four different scenarios that are possible. Ani Rava Basrei, Rava added on the following, meaning Rava is now explaining what are these four cases that Rav Safar is referring to. Number one, what is the case in which Shneim, both of them are mutter to take the item Damar Lei, Kinei, Kishir, Zuzach, when he says to him, you're making a kinyan on the amount proportion to the monies that you paid, and the buyer keeps it in the meantime, then they both share a kinyan in it. As we saw in the Mishnah, when you said that it's going to work retroactive too now, which really just very simply plays out this kinyan me'achshav that we learned about in the Mishnah. So four different potential outcomes of this case in our Mishnah. Man Tana of Zuzah Havi Allah Kabach. And we conclude, Man Tana Shem Asurin, who's the Tana that's going to say that both Asar, Ravuna, Breit Yeshua, the like Rav Yehuda. Why? The Rav Yehuda Amar Tzarechad Beribis Mutter, a case that we're going to have to get back to. The ribis is only if it flows both ways. If it's only one-sided ribis, Rav Yehuda has unique chiddush that it's going to be mutter. To wrap it up, one more short Gemara, Mashchal Labayis Mashchal Isadeh. If someone put up a house or a field as a mashkan, as a collateral, when you want to sell, you're only able to sell with these monies to me. Aser, but if you say they're going to sell it for their value, then mutter. Meaning, as we can start to envision, there's only one way that it's going to be mutter, that's going to be ribis, that there's going to be flux in the price. So says Rav Yehuda, that would have been mutter. So the price that says the aser is clearly not like Rav Yehuda. Return it to its mutter. Mantana. Like Rav Yehuda, Rav Yehuda, mutter. Says the Gemara, Maisha Reisha Maisha Seifa. Rav Seifa Damar Le Midai. Today you dig a chiddush in the Seifa is where he said that it should all be up to your das. Still, this is a chiddush. We don't go to Rav Yehuda. We'll pick it up from Hukav Rabbi Siyata Tishmaya.